They paid Cowboy to guard a savage Apache, but when he saw her, he knew he had to set her free. Jack had spent most of his life riding the open range, tending cattle and living a quiet life in the dusty corners of the frontier. The sun was always high and the land seemed to stretch on forever, offering little more than isolation and hard work. But Jack had always felt at home there. The wind in his hair, the smell of horses, and the feeling of freedom. It was the life he had chosen, and he had never known anything else. One afternoon, while working on the ranch, Jack was called into the rancher's office. Mr. Finley, the owner of the large cattle ranch, was a man of few words, and Jack knew that the job wasn't going to be an easy one when he was handed a note with a hefty sum of money written on it. "Jack, I've got a special job for you," Mr. Finley began, his voice gravelly and stern. "We've got a problem. An Apache woman has been captured, and I need someone to watch her. She's a savage, and we can't have her running loose. They're bringing her here in a few days. Your job is simple. Keep an eye on her, make sure she doesn't escape, and make sure she doesn't cause any trouble. I'm paying well for it. Are you interested?" Jack stood there for a moment, the offer hanging in the air. He was a cowboy, not a guard. He'd worked cattle and faced dangers, but he had never been asked to watch over a prisoner before. Still, the money was tempting. The ranch had been struggling lately, and the offer was too good to pass up. The pay would help Jack get through the winter, especially with the long months ahead. "All right," Jack said after a moment's pause. "I'll take it, but I don't like the idea of watching over a woman, especially one from the Apache." Mr. Finley nodded. "You won't like it, but it'll be worth your time. She's dangerous, and I need someone I can trust to keep her in check. Don't let your guard down. I've heard stories about how these Apache women are wild, and they'll fight to the death if they have to." Jack wasn't sure what to expect, but as the days went on, the excitement about the money began to grow. It was a job, and it was one he was used to, keeping something, or someone, under control. But something deep inside him was uneasy about the whole situation. He had heard enough stories about the Apache to know they were a fierce people, warriors who fought for their land, and the thought of guarding one of them made him nervous. The day came when the Apache woman was brought to the ranch. Jack had prepared himself for anything. He'd heard that the Apache were known for their strength and their ability to survive against impossible odds. But when the woman arrived, Jack was taken aback. She wasn't what he expected at all. She was small, perhaps only a few inches taller than his own 6 feet, but there was something powerful about her. Her dark eyes burned with defiance, and her face, though weathered from hardship, had a quiet strength to it. Jack's first instinct was to look for weapons, but she had none. Her hands were tied, her hair was tangled, and she moved with the grace of a wild animal. Jack could sense that this was no ordinary woman. She was a fighter, a survivor. But what struck him most was the anger in her eyes, an anger that seemed directed at everything, including him. He felt a pang of sympathy, though he couldn't quite understand why. The ranch hands brought her into a small cabin by the edge of the property, where Jack was to keep watch. His job was simple, or so he thought. Keep her inside, make sure she didn't escape, and report back to Mr. Finley if she did anything out of line. But the longer he watched her, the more he realized that she wasn't going to be easy to control. She sat silently in the corner of the room, glaring at the walls, her eyes never leaving Jack. He noticed that she didn't speak much, and when she did, it was in a language he couldn't understand. He wasn't sure if she was speaking Apache or something else, but it didn't matter. It wasn't his job to understand her. It was his job to keep her contained. But as the hours passed, Jack began to feel the weight of the situation. He had seen women in town, women who wore pretty dresses and smiled kindly at him. But Taza, he knew her name from the other ranch hands, was nothing like them. She didn't care about pleasantries, and she didn't seem to care much about the fact that she was a prisoner. She was just, there. Jack couldn't help but watch her. There was something about her wildness that was different from the other prisoners he had seen over the years. Most prisoners would have been broken, scared, or desperate by now. But Taza was just as fierce as the moment she had been brought in. She didn't seem to fear him or anyone else. And though Jack was trying to keep a stern face, he couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't as much of a prisoner as he had been told. He began to wonder if there was more to her story, something he wasn't being told. The first few days passed in silence. Jack would check on her regularly, but she barely acknowledged his presence. There were times when he would offer her food or water, but she refused to take it. She wouldn't speak to him, wouldn't make eye contact. It was like she was in a world of her own, a world where nothing mattered except the endless horizon beyond the cabin walls. But then, one day, something shifted. Jack walked into the cabin to find her staring out the window, her hands resting on the windowsill. For the first time since her arrival, she didn't look angry. She just looked tired. It was as if the weight of everything had finally caught up with her. Jack stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. He could feel the tension in the room, and for the first time he wondered if he was doing the right thing. She didn't notice him at first, but when she turned around, their eyes met. It wasn't the same fire he had seen earlier. There was something else in her gaze now, something softer, but still full of defiance. "You think I'm going to stay here forever?" she asked, her voice low and gravelly, as though she hadn't spoken in days. "You think I'll just wait for you to throw me in a cage like some animal?" Jack didn't know how to answer. He had no words for what he felt. He had been hired to watch over her, to keep her from escaping. But the more he watched her, the more he saw her as a person, not just a prisoner. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said finally. His voice sounded foreign to him, softer than he intended. "I'm just doing my job." She looked at him for a long time, as if deciding whether to trust him or not. Then, without another word, she turned away and went back to the corner of the cabin. Jack didn't know what to say or do, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this than just a simple job. There was a story here, one he had yet to understand. And as he stood there, staring at the woman in the corner, Jack knew that this would be the hardest job he'd ever done. Days passed in silence, the kind of silence that feels heavy with unspoken thoughts. Jack continued his watch over Taza, but each day brought something different. The routine was simple, almost too simple. He'd bring her food, check on her, and then leave her to her own devices. But there was something about Taza that kept him coming back. It wasn't just the way she looked at him with eyes full of defiance, nor was it the way she moved, like a wild animal trapped in a cage. It was the subtle shifts he saw in her, the small signs that she was more than just the prisoner Mr. Finley had made her out to be. At first, Jack had kept his distance, both physically and emotionally. She was a captive, and he was the guard. That's all it was supposed to be. But every time he brought her food, every time he checked the cabin to make sure she hadn't found a way to escape, he found himself wondering what had brought her to this point. He could see that she was angry, but there was more to it. Beneath her hardened exterior, Jack sensed a quiet sadness, something that was buried deep within her. And though she never spoke to him, he couldn't shake the feeling that she was silently asking for something more than just survival. Taza didn't speak much, And when she did, her words were often harsh, blunt, and full of mistrust. The first time Jack tried to speak to her, he wasn't sure what kind of response he was expecting. Maybe she'd yell at him. Maybe she'd throw something. But instead, she simply looked at him with cold, unreadable eyes. "You're not like the others," she said once, her voice a soft rasp, as she stared at him from across the room. "You don't care about me." Jack wasn't sure what to say to that. Of course he cared, but it was complicated. He was here to do a job, and that job wasn't to care about her. She was the enemy, or at least that's what he had been told. The enemy of the ranch, of the settlers, of everything that Jack knew. Why? Yet something in him made it difficult to simply follow the orders and shut his heart off. "I'm just trying to do my job," Jack said, unsure of his own words. He felt awkward saying it, as if the words were hollow. It wasn't just a job. He wasn't just guarding a prisoner. There was something deeper at play here, something Jack didn't fully understand yet. Taza tilted her head, studying him. Her eyes softened for a brief moment before the guard went back up. It was as if she had momentarily considered something, but the walls she had built around herself were too strong. She turned away from him and returned to her quiet place in the cabin, her back rigid as though nothing had changed. Jack spent the next few days thinking about what she had said. The more he observed her, the more he realized how little he knew about her. Taza wasn't just some savage, some wild woman to be controlled. There was a story behind her, a history that he couldn't even begin to guess at. He started to notice things he hadn't before. The way she moved with a quiet grace, even when she was angry. The way her eyes seemed to search the horizon as if she was looking for something or someone. She wasn't just a prisoner. She was a woman who had been shaped by experiences Jack couldn't imagine. It became clear that she wasn't going to be easily broken. Every time he tried to offer her something, a meal, a drink, a blanket, she refused it with a look of disdain. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't look at him directly. She was a mystery, and that made her all the more fascinating to him. It wasn't just her strength that caught Jack's attention, but her independence. She didn't beg for anything. She didn't ask for pity. She didn't seem to care that she was a prisoner. And that thought lingered in Jack's mind. Why didn't she care? Why wasn't she broken? Most prisoners he had known, even those who had been captured in the heat of battle, would have given in by now. But not Taza. She seemed unbothered by her captivity, almost as if she had been prepared for it all along. One afternoon, Jack entered the cabin to find her sitting on the floor, her back against the wall, staring at the ground. It was a rare moment of stillness for her. Usually she paced or stood by the window, but this time she was still, almost as if she had given up on something. Jack hesitated at the door, unsure of whether to approach. He had been careful not to invade her space, not wanting to push her any further into isolation. But something in her quiet resignation pulled him in. "Why don't you eat?" Jack asked, his voice gentler than usual. He was trying again, trying to connect with her in a way that wasn't just about guarding her. He needed to understand why she was so different from the other prisoners. He needed to understand her. Taza's eyes flickered up to meet his. For a moment, there was nothing but silence between them. Then, she slowly shook her head. "I don't eat the food they give me," she said quietly. "I won't be weak like that." Jack wasn't sure what to make of her words. Was it pride? Was it defiance? Or was it something more? A refusal to submit, to let her captors break her spirit. He didn't know, but he felt the weight of her words. She wasn't just refusing food, she was refusing to be controlled, refusing to be like the others who had been broken down by captivity. "You're not weak," Jack said before he could stop himself. It was the first time he had spoken to her without the strict sense of duty that had marked their previous interactions. His voice softened, and for a moment, Taza looked surprised, as if she had never expected him to say something like that. She didn't respond right away, but Jack could see the flicker of something in her eyes. Maybe it was hope, or maybe it was distrust. He couldn't be sure, but it was enough to make him wonder. What was it about her that made him want to stand up for her? Why did he feel this way when all he had been told was that she was a savage, an enemy? He couldn't answer that question. Not yet. Jack spent more time with her after that, not in the same way he had been doing, checking in, delivering food, or making sure she was still confined, but simply being present. He learned to read her moods, to sense when she was calm and when she was on the edge of breaking. There was something there, something he couldn't quite grasp, but it pulled him in. At night, when he would return to his small cabin, Jack would lie awake, thinking about Taza. It was strange, the way her presence lingered with him, long after he had left her alone in the cabin. The more he saw of her, the more he wondered about her life, about the things she had endured, about the reason she was the way she was. And the more he wondered, the harder it became to see her as just a prisoner. Jack couldn't help it. He was starting to care. The days passed, and Jack found himself coming back to the cabin more often. At first, it was all business, just checking on Taza, making sure she didn't try to escape. But soon, the lines between duty and something deeper began to blur. Jack was beginning to care about her. He didn't know why, but something inside him made him want to help her. He was tasked with keeping her contained, but there was something about her that pulled at his conscience. She wasn't the savage warrior he had been told she was. She was a person, a woman who had been wronged, who had a story Jack couldn't understand yet. Jack's conversations with Taza remained limited. She didn't say much, but the few words she did speak had weight. When she spoke, it was always short, sharp, and filled with an air of bitterness. Jack noticed that she was guarded, her trust in him almost non-existent. She rarely looked at him directly, and when she did, there was always something guarded in her eyes, as if she was measuring him, trying to figure out whether he was a threat or someone she could trust. One evening, as Jack walked back to the cabin after finishing his work, he heard voices. It was Mr. Finley and a couple of his ranch hands. They were standing by the barn, talking in low voices. Jack approached quietly, trying to catch snippets of their conversation without being noticed. "They want to take her to the town," Mr. Brownsfit Finley was saying. "Once we're done with her, they'll either sell her or hand her over to the law. I don't care what they do with her as long as we get paid." The words stung, even though Jack knew he shouldn't have been surprised. Taza had been captured in battle, and people didn't tend to show much mercy to enemies, especially ones like her. But hearing it spoken so coldly made something inside Jack shift. He felt a burning anger, but it wasn't aimed at Taza. It was aimed at the way she had been treated, like a piece of property, like something to be disposed of when it was no longer useful. Jack turned and walked away, his mind racing. He couldn't stand the thought of her being handed off to strangers, or worse, sold to someone who would treat her even more cruelly than he had seen so far. He didn't know what he could do, but something inside him told him he couldn't just stand by and watch it happen. That night, as Jack returned to the cabin to check on Taza, he found her sitting by the small window, staring out into the dark horizon. She didn't look at him when he entered, but he could tell she was aware of his presence. Her body was tense, as though she was always ready for something. always waiting for an opportunity to escape or fight back. Jack didn't know if it was fear or strength in her posture, but he knew she wasn't the kind of woman who would give up without a fight. "How long have you been here?" Jack asked softly, not wanting to startle her. It was the first time he'd spoken to her without the usual distance he'd kept before. The question was casual, but the meaning behind it was heavier than he intended. She didn't answer immediately, but Jack noticed her shoulders relax slightly as though she was processing his question. After a long silence, she spoke, her voice low and tired. "A long time," she said. "But not as long as the others think?" Jack's brow furrowed, and he took a step closer to her. "What do you mean?" She looked at him then, her dark eyes catching the dim light from the window. There was something in her gaze, something more than anger now. Jack didn't know if it was trust or just resignation, but it made him pause. "You think you know who I am," Taza said, her words quiet but cutting through the silence. "You think I'm just a prisoner, a savage, someone to be controlled. But you don't know anything about me." Jack's throat tightened at her words. He had never thought of her as just a prisoner, but hearing her say it out loud made him realize how little he actually knew about her. She was right. He had only seen the surface. He had never asked about her life before the capture, before the war. He had never asked about the things that had shaped her into the woman sitting before him. "You're right," Jack admitted, his voice softer than before. "I don't know anything about you, but I'm trying to. I don't want to just see you as a prisoner." Taza's eyes softened for a fraction of a second, then hardened again. She stood up, the movement slow but deliberate. She didn't answer him right away, but Jack could tell that his words had struck something inside her. Maybe it was just a moment of vulnerability, but for the first time she looked uncertain. "You think I trust you?" she asked, her voice sharp again. "I don't trust anyone. Not the ranchers, not the soldiers, and especially not you." Jack took a breath, trying to understand her. He had never been in her shoes, never faced the same struggles she had. He couldn't imagine what it must have been like for her to lose everything, her freedom, her people, her way of life. It had to have left scars, deep ones that he would never fully understand. "I don't expect you to trust me," Jack said quietly. "I just want to help, if I can." Taza paused at the window, her face turning toward the night sky. Jack could see the tension in her shoulders, the weight of everything she had been through. For a brief moment, there was no anger, no resistance, just a woman, trapped in a life she didn't want. Jack felt the pull of something inside him. He had made up his mind. He had to do something. He couldn't let her be sold, couldn't let her fate be decided by others who didn't care about her life. He didn't know what would happen next, but the thought of letting her go to whoever wanted to buy her made him sick. "What do you want?" Jack asked, his voice steady but filled with urgency. Taza turned to face him then, her eyes meeting his with a look that was almost unreadable. It was as if she was weighing his words, deciding whether to trust him or not. "Freedom," she said simply. "I want to be free, and I won't be anyone's prisoner." Jack nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. He had heard it in her voice. The desperate need for freedom, the fight that was still alive in her. It was clear now. If he was going to help her, it wouldn't just be about watching over her. It would mean doing whatever it took to get her out of here, to set her free. He had no plan yet, no clear way to make it happen. But for the first time, Jack felt like he was ready to do whatever it took. Taza deserved more than this life. She deserved to be free. As he left the cabin that night, Jack's mind raced. He didn't know what his next move would be, but one thing was certain. He couldn't just sit back and watch her become a piece of someone else's property. He had to act. The next few days passed quickly, with Jack's mind constantly racing. He couldn't get Taza's words out of his head. She wanted freedom. She wanted to be free of the ranch, free from the hands that had held her captive. Jack had always thought of himself as a man of duty, but in this moment he realized that his duty wasn't just to the rancher, it was to her. Jack knew that he couldn't just keep going through the motions. He couldn't simply watch over her and follow orders. He had to act. But the plan, whatever it was, would have to be careful. He wasn't just risking his own life. He was risking hers, too. He spent the next few days thinking about the situation, weighing his options. He could help her escape. He knew the land around the ranch well enough, but there were risks. The ranch hands were always patrolling the area, and the rancher's reach was long. Even if Jack and Taza managed to slip away, there was always the chance they would be caught. The thought of them being caught made Jack's stomach twist in knots. If they were captured, the rancher would do worse than just punish them. It was clear that Taza's life was at stake. But Jack also knew that doing nothing was worse. He couldn't stand by and watch her be taken away, sold like an animal, or worse, kept locked up forever. Taza was not a thing to be controlled. She was a person with hopes and dreams, with a life and a past that deserved respect. One evening, as Jack was making his way to the cabin, he saw something he hadn't expected. Taza was standing outside, looking up at the sky. It was a clear night, and the stars shone brightly overhead. She didn't seem to notice him at first, and Jack paused, watching her for a moment. There was something peaceful in the way she stood there, her face softening as she gazed into the night. For a brief moment, she didn't look like a prisoner, but like someone who was free. Taza turned and saw him standing there, and her expression hardened again. The wall was back up. Jack couldn't blame her. Trust didn't come easy for someone like her. But Jack wasn't going to give up. He had made up his mind, and this time, he wasn't going to let fear stop him. "I've been thinking," Jack said, approaching her slowly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "There's a way out of here. I can help you escape." Taza's eyes narrowed, and for a moment Jack thought she might refuse again. But then she said something that surprised him. "Ah." "How?" Her voice was quiet, but there was a spark of hope in it, something that Jack hadn't heard before. "I know the land around here. I know where the ranch hands patrol and where the roads are safe. We can get out if we leave before dawn. There's a chance, if we're careful." Taza stared at him for a long moment, as if she was considering his words, weighing them against the risks. Jack could see the hesitation in her eyes. She wanted to believe him, but trust wasn't something that came easily after everything she had been through. Jack could see the battle in her mind, the fear, the hope, the desire to be free, and the fear of what might happen if things went wrong. She took a deep breath, and for the first time since Jack had met her, she spoke with a calmness that surprised him. "You're sure? You think we can make it?" Jack nodded. "Ah, I am sure. But we have to be fast. We can't wait until tomorrow. If we leave now, we can make it out before anyone knows we're gone." Taza looked down at the ground for a moment, her eyes clouded with uncertainty. Jack didn't pressure her. He knew that this decision was hers and hers alone. He was offering her a chance at freedom, but she had to be the one to take it. And finally, she looked up at him again, her expression still hard but softened by something else, something that Jack recognized as a flicker of trust. "All right," she said, her voice low but steady. "Let's go." The plan was simple. Jack had learned over the years how to move quietly through the night, and he knew how to avoid the main roads where the ranch hands would be watching. The night was their best chance, and they had to move fast. Taza gathered the few belongings she had, and Jack led her toward the back of the cabin, away from the main house. As they moved through the darkness, Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. He had done his best to make sure they wouldn't be caught, but there were always risks. They needed to be careful, to stay out of sight, to avoid any noise. Every step felt like it carried a weight of its own. But Jack didn't look back. He couldn't. He had made his choice, and there was no turning back now. Taza kept pace with him, her footsteps light and quiet. Jack could feel her presence beside him, and for the first time he felt like they were partners in this. She wasn't just a prisoner anymore. She was a woman with the same goal, the same desire for freedom. And for the first time, Jack wasn't just protecting her. He was helping her. They moved through the woods, Jack guiding them away from the ranch. The sounds of the night surrounded them, the rustling of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl. Everything seemed so still, so quiet. Jack couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone might find them at any moment. But he didn't stop. They couldn't afford to stop. After what felt like hours, they reached the edge of the ranch, where the land opened up to a vast stretch of open fields. They were getting close to the forest that would lead them to safety, and Jack's heart began to ease. They were almost there, but then, as they moved forward, Jack heard something. A faint sound, like footsteps behind them. His heart skipped a beat.